this thing working? All right. All right, well, thanks to the ZBrush guys for bringing me down. This is like, it's an honor and it's fun and it's a rare thing to get to do, so I appreciate it. Let's see, what to start with here. So, well, my name's Peter Koenig. I currently work at ArenaNet, working on Guild Wars and all kinds of fun secret projects there. I'm on a creature team, and it's kind of a dream job. I've only been there about 6 months, I would say, but it's been fantastic so far. And basically, all I do is sit in ZBrush all day and sculpt creatures, and it's kind of ideal because that's what I like to do. So, how do we get out of here? Right. So I'm a bit weird. I mean, I'll give you just a short background on who I am and like where I come from. I'm kind of one of the older dudes in this entertainment design business. I started before the computers came and took over everything. So I thought I'd just sort of do a little show and tell, just a few old images, some of the newer work. And my plan is, we've been seeing lots of like perfect, gorgeous, labor-intensive ZBrush work, and I kind of do that stuff all the time. I kind of use ZBrush for a million different things. Like, as we know, it's a great tool for, everything under the sun. So I thought I'd just show a slice of where an area I use ZBrush, where is, I do a lot of concept art. I do freelance for film and stuff like that. The area I wanted to show is just using ZBrush to kind of help get 2D art started and get concepts done kind of quickly, and use those great attributes to kind of get some great looking pictures. So I made a bunch of original art just for this show here, and I'm just going to step by step some of it. Some of it's just little breakdowns and movies, and at the maybe through the halfway point, we'll see how far I get. I can just demo some work live. But I'll just show you some new stuff, some old stuff, and a few breakdowns, and hopefully you'll find it useful. Oops, let's go back. Old work. I got a lot of this old work. Let's sort of sort this the right way before I start. It doesn't matter. Let me just see what I got here. Right. Okay, like I said, old days. This is like, I spent most of my career working with this guy. Oh, why is it opening Illustrator? That's cute. We don't want that. Hold on a second. It's supposed to just preview the picture, right? Get out of here. Preview? Okay. Is that the best way to show it? I don't know. But yeah, I worked with Phil Tippett for like a third of my life. In the old days, I started as a sculptor, late 80s. All I really wanted to do was get into creature making and costumes and stuff, and that's kind of where I started my career, was sculpting things old school by hand. And I did that for a while, but then I got a job at Tippett, and things changed once Jurassic Park came in and ruined everything for the practical people. But I was lucky enough to get in there right when that happened and sort of see it as weird transition. And even though I didn't have a big role in that film, it was just kind of a fascinating experience to be part of. But I continued to sculpt different things while I was there. Let's see, how can we do this so it looks nicer? Is there a way to zoom in here? Right. So I did a lot of maquettes and previs for digital back when it was a lot harder to do that sort of thing. Maquettes to get director approval, and things we use for scanning maquettes, some of these are team efforts, not like solely responsible for all this stuff. But those were the old days, and that's kind of, I spent most of my life trying to learn to sculpt, and then things changed, and it was a matter of adapting to the new world that was slowly coming upon us, or quickly, really. Nowadays, I do kind of a lot of stuff. At Tippett, I wore so many hats. I was an animator for 10 years. I fabricated all these creature-y things, and then I learned to be very versatile, which was necessary there. And I try to carry that over into the digital work I do now. It's a way to keep the bills paid, you know what I mean? Let's see. What should we preview this with? It's not going to look lame. I mean, can we do better than this? Is there like anything with a black background that we could use to? Oh, better. All right. I never use that. So nowadays I get called upon to do previs, and I don't want to play. That's one thing I don't want to do. All right, just let it go. What's that? You can right-click and turn it off in the middle like that. Oh, yeah? There we go. So I wish I could show you stuff I worked on over the last year and a half or so, but so much of it is under wraps. I'm just going to show you a lot of personal work, and hopefully that's interesting enough. Sometimes I'll make stuff like this where it's fully constructed properly and UV'd and painted and all that stuff. I'll also make things like that look like that they're all finished off, but in fact they're, there's a lot of Photoshop fixing up to get this concept looking good. As well as, just straight paint overs of rough models, and we'll get into some of that stuff later. This is an example of the other kind of work. I'm known as a creature person. I'm always hired to do monsters and stuff like that. But I love doing other things too, like hard surface and spaceships and environments. And I worked with my buddy George Hull on, unfortunately, just this one ship for Jupiter Ascending. Let me just show you real quick. I have his website up. No, actually, I have his. Never mind, I got his thing here. So if you don't know George, he's worked on all the Matrix films and this stuff, and he's just a brilliant 2D guy. And we just had a back and forth to kind of create this ship and sort of pre-visualize it, both in 2D and 3D. And it was just, there was so much to kind of consider when designing the ship for that film. There's so much acting it had to do. They just wanted to see all these angles and things, which was time-consuming to do in 2D. So having a 3D mock-up was very handy for them. And ultimately, I took it a little further than this, got some interesting patterns on it and stuff like that, and handed it off to ILM, and they built it for real for the film. Let's see, another typical. The stuff I'm going to show today, if we have some time to do live stuff, is kind of my technique of brainstorming, where I'm kit bashing using an insert mesh brush that I made. And this is a very typical kind of crazy, bizarre creature that started off as a kit bash, combined with key shot and Photoshop and painting over and things like that to kind of come up with a key image. Whoops. I think touch is on or something. Right. This guy being another example of, it looks rendered and it looks like all the bells and whistles were taken care of, but in fact it's just a bunch of flat renders combined, and then, and I'll show you in detail what I'm talking about, but this is a Photoshop trick to make it look like a final character. And this is maybe, 2 evenings of work to get this picture. Another thing that makes Photoshop so great is that speed is such an issue when it comes to designing stuff for films or any other clients. when you're freelancing, you're charging by the week or by the hour and stuff, and people are trying to get the most out of you, and you're also trying to crank stuff out to please your clients. And so just having ZBrush as a tool to kind of get you started, a lot of the stuff, you could do straight drawing and things like that, but I'm so three-dimensionally minded, coming from a sculpture background, that I think in terms of volumes and stuff like that very easily, and for me, it's just a big speed enhancer to use ZBrush to get this stuff started. So I'm going to do a breakdown of this guy later. It's just a fun environment I did, and using some of the great tools in ZBrush combined with photographic material and painting and stuff like that. So I have this picture broken down for you, and we'll kind of go through it. You can see the different elements that make it up. There's another similar type picture where it's just, a very, is my mouse working? Yeah. This ship was like kit bashed in about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. The city in the background was smacked together using insert meshes that, somebody put online on the ZBrush Central, that sort of Star Wars-y set of, greebles. And then, of course, a lot of Photoshop treatment afterwards to kind of get it looking real. Some of my other freelance work, I worked for Turtle Rock for a couple of years working on Evolve. I did a great deal of, I was a freelancer. I wasn't getting the juicy choice work that the full-timers on site got. So I spent about a year just making rocks. It's, it sounds like a weird thing to do for a year, but it actually was extremely challenging and actually pretty fun, because they needed so many different kinds of rock formations, and these things were set dressings, so they really made an impact on the game and how you felt in it. And it also helped me get a good workflow to make nice rocks pretty quick. We'll just sort of go through this stuff. So here's an example of a piece of key art I made for myself and how it started off. A very simple ZBrush smacked together interior using insert meshes and just rocks that I already had laying around, and a rough idea of what I wanted that I then brought into KeyShot. This building was made using surface noise. There's great tutorials on the site about how to make these kinds of structures using alpha channels. I'll show you some of the other buildings I made this way. And then, from that, it's just painting over in Photoshop. In a perfect world, you'd have time to make everything beautiful and construct everything. But in a work situation, you may have a day, you may have 2 days or a week to create a piece of key art that they need quickly. So after a bunch of just painting by hand, and basically it's kind of like matte painting techniques, although I'm not going for photorealism. You do use a lot of the same tricks with finding good textures and things, and a lot of just hand painting. Let's see, this is going to be a little bit mixed up as far as the order goes. This is some concept work I did for Warm Bodies, a film that came out a while ago. Bad guys, zombies with no genitalia. Okay, so here's a picture. It's been around forever, but I don't think I've put up too many pictures of the making of that picture. This is just basically a creature sculpted in ZBrush, kind of posed, and at the time I was using Moto, since this was before KeyShot. So what this is really what the picture is consisting of. Relatively high mesh I brought in there, a quick terrain that I built with a background, and some painting over to kind of get it to this state. Let's see, this is an example of spending a bit more time on a creature and getting it to a finished state. But I don't have a before and after of the creature, but there's a great deal of surface detail that's just kind of hand painted in there. Because all I'm trying to get is one good shot. Here's another more recent creature I did just for fun, and this is kind of what I was going to do for my demo. For brainstorming and just coming up with new ideas, I like to kit bash once in a while. in a perfect world, you have all the time in the world, and you can sculpt carefully from, a sphere and get all the parts together just the way you want it. Sometimes you just want to crank out some interesting shapes and see where it goes as a paint over. And I knew roughly I wanted to do a dragon. I had a bunch of insert shapes that I brought in and smashed together, and did a bit of detail on it, not too much. I didn't get too precious with it, and then spent far more time kind of cleaning it up in ZBrush.
You got a question back here.
Sure.
Way in the back.
Hi, I'm just wondering what that bashing thing you were talking about before you start your sculpt.
Kit bashing?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll show you. I brought the insert mesh I made. I just made an insert brush, multi-insert brush with, I don't know, it's like a couple of hundred simple shapes that I kind of mash together and try things with in Dynamesh, and look for happy accidents, and combine that with sort of a design sense. Like this one was taken a lot further than I would normally do for a 2D concept. But that's kind of the final look. Here's another, this is for a film that kind of went away that I was working on. I got the okay from the fellow who was making it, but this is for some pitch materials, this kind of zombie-ish kind of character. And this is another way of using ZBrush. Put a bunch of time into a reasonably good part of the image, like let's say the character's head, and then combine it with photographic elements as well as paint over and all this other stuff to come up with a final image. So here's this kind of, there's a story behind why it looks the way it looks, but I can't go into all that. It's secret. But yeah, just sculpt it, send it directly into KeyShot. There was a background that I was roughly matching lighting-wise. So here I'm just sort of adjusting lights with some basic, very, very loose poly painting on there. A bit of cavity masking just to give some details. And then I'm finding elements to combine this render with. This head here, rendered on its own, and then Photoshop-wise combined with this jacket, this background, and then the final image. So it looks like a real-world object, a mask or a guy in a suit or whatever, but it's just a bunch of nasty little tricks to kind of get the final result you want quickly. So I did a few of these for this project, these weird, grotesque guys. Let's see. So that's some of the more recent work. I could go on with that, but I made a bunch of, let me find my folder again. Oh, USB drive. I made a few projects just to kind of show here, to show a range of ways you could use ZBrush to make two-dimensional art. Some of them are real simple, kind of obvious to people who are very experienced, and some are more complex. But let me just show you. Let's see. Why don't I do that? Let me do that futuristic city breakdown real quick, because I don't have. That was just a matter of gathering the files, and you could see what went into that picture. So here's our final image, right? It's color graded, it's finished, it's got all the nice lights and all these goodies. And let me go in and sort of pop open some of the files that make up that. Let's see. I should start with, I started this image and got the idea to do it when I like to look through photos and gather reference just for fun. Once in a while, and I happened across this city picture of Tokyo. And I really liked it because it was unusual to find a picture, first of all, that was a good size that you could work with. But I also found the time of day really great. You could do a lot with lighting. And I thought it was really interesting that none of the buildings had lights turned on. So you didn't have to paint out a bunch of lights if you didn't want them. So it was kind of an interesting picture, and it was kind of like it was boring enough to add things to. It wasn't, it's very generic, general picture of a city. Let's see if I can, yeah. I think I used a bit of this one as well. So I kind of started there, and I started thinking about what I wanted to make. And then I thought, I'd been making these buildings. I'm not sure about the order of these. Let me just do this real quick. I've been making buildings using this surface noise technique that Mr. Druss had demoed in ZBrush classroom, Z classroom. And I was just doing these just to kind of learn how to use that technique to make interesting structures very quickly. Like using his techniques that he put up there, this building maybe took less than an hour. This one a little bit more because I just layering lots of parts together. I won't go into a super detailed explanation as to how this works. It's on the ZBrush Z classroom website if you want to learn how to do this sort of thing. But it's got a lot of interesting applications you can do with it once you figure out the technique. I mean, you can make very kind of believable buildings as well as real outlandish things. And you can change them very quickly and get new ones. And it's you can kind of build up a library that way. And I was making these futuristic buildings because that's kind of, I'm a sci-fi geek, so. So these are these are the buildings I used for that final image. They're all very dark because of the time of day, and obviously they're not painted. I'm just using some different materials here and there to kind of give them a little bit of variation. I didn't use a ton of them because I knew I was going to be painting some by hand as well in the background. Here's a typical kind of futuristic building combined with kind of a trick to kind of create lighting. And it's just a Photoshop trick, painting lights from a nighttime city scene, kind of cloning them onto this picture. I don't want to go too deep into Photoshop techniques because this is a ZBrush demo. So I may do a tutorial on it because it's a lot of fun to do. But this picture itself, the building took maybe a couple hours to kind of come up with, and then another, I don't know, half an hour to apply those lights. And you have something that looks very complex very quickly, and that's one of the things I love about using ZBrush for this kind of stuff. I also did a number of ships that I thought I might need, almost the same technique. These are just kit bashed out of an insert mesh brush. I have a few like high-tech insert mesh brushes where you have multiple insert meshes. And most of them, some of them I built myself. Some of them are a combination of stuff I found on Gumroad or people were giving away on the forums and stuff like that. And I didn't need these to be realistic ships. I just needed them to have enough kind of noise and interesting detail to read in the background. They weren't going to be featured. And I thought, okay, a couple cargo-y looking ships and stuff like that. And they would get a paint over. There's a couple featured ships. I mean, you may even recognize some of the parts in here from people's Gumroad available brushes. But this detail on the surface was all that surface noise technique over a very simple, primitive shape underneath. And that was another thing that didn't take long to do. And I didn't need it to be perfect. I just needed it to be decent to comp in there and sort of fix up two-dimensionally. This guy was going to be more featured, kind of coming at camera, and I just spent a little more time kind of arranging all the parts and making it seem somewhat sensible as a piece of technology. But again, it's nothing but insert meshes and things squashed together, It comes down to having a bit of design ability and knowing where knowing what you're trying to get out of it. And these things take time to learn, of course. But that's how that was done. This is another one that's interesting. This is the traffic in the image. We'll go back to the other image real quick. But there's sky traffic, and what I did is I used, I made a grid and I used nanomesh and some very simple ship shapes. And I applied these ships to the grid to create variation and direction. And it was just a quick and dirty way to get a lot of stuff looking usable. And all I did this is the traffic in the sky, and all I did was flip this image over to make the traffic below. and comp that in. Let's see, is there anything else here? No. Yeah, and different skies. I think I showed you this stuff. Yeah. Right. Let's see, did I do a little movie? I didn't do a little movie. Right.
Any questions while you looks?
So
There's
you know,
one. Daniel has one. Daniel has one.
Oh, you got one? Okay.
Here, this is not related to cities, but I remember you talking about your work on Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise and his
No.
likeness. Wasn't that you?
I didn't work on Vanilla Sky.
Oh.
He was on Mountains of Madness, though. We were drawing.
I love
we
the
were,
Aussie
we were drawing creatures and monsters in Guillermo's offices, and the special guests arrived, and we just hung out with Tom Cruise for 2 hours. Because he was going to help get that movie made, so it was really interesting afternoon.
You got another question here on the floor. Coming at you. Hot off the floor, right over here.
On the final image, you have kind of a depth mat going into the background, like a haze. Are you painting that in Photoshop, or
Well, I have the actual Photoshop file here. I'll just sort of step through the layers, and you can kind of see, and I'll just sort of quickly explain the layers as I go through them. So here's my background. There's that kind of city cloned around a little bit. And there's a whole bunch of layers, so I'll just step through quick. Replace the sky. Kind of adjust the colors. There's my traffic, roughly put in there. Now, this isn't literally how I constructed the pictures, because there's a lot of other stuff going on to create these layers, but this is a good idea of how the picture was built. So the order might be a little different in the actual making of it. Starting to add background material. Is that, let me see, it's maybe this bigger. Let's see, yeah, so adding background stuff two-dimensionally into Photoshop. These are using custom-made shape brushes in Photoshop. Also augmenting existing buildings by just painting over them by hand. Adding some of those cargo ships I built really quickly. Starting to add some atmospheric haze. More little details here and there. Put a new building over that building and put a ship kind of docking there. These are some of the new buildings I made. And you're just kind of constructing it bit by bit, layer by layer. Atmosphere, some smoke and stuff like that. Some lighting, hand-painted sort of lighting effects to kind of get that time of day looking good. A little more foreground dust. There's the main building in the foreground placed in there. You know, when you render it in Keyshot, I'm trying to approximate the perspective of the background image to kind of make it all fit. Here's let's see. Oh, let me do this. Oh, we don't have that working. All right. Yeah. So here's our little ship going away. If you go in here, there's all the layers for that. Here's our ship coming towards us. Whoops. You know, I'm not trying to sell it as photographic, real, close up. I'm trying to create an effect as you see the whole thing together. Right. And you just keep whittling away. There's a couple layers of city lights that are painted in there. Get them a little brighter. Some more stuff going on in the city. I was going to do all kinds of elaborate stuff on the ground level, but I got really tired of looking at this, so I finished it. And then a color grading pass. I use, you could use Photoshop for this. A friend of mine, Stu Mashowitz, used to run the shop, the orphanage. He has a piece of software called Magic Bullet from Red Giant software. And Magic Bullet is awesome at doing color grading real quickly. You can try lots of different styles out and tweak it all. So there's that guy. I didn't want to spend too much time on this guy, but I did anyway.
So here's a question online from George. Peter, when you want to ask, which and why is better, which way, hold on, let me rephrase this. I want to ask which way and why is better compositing, with pictures or painting like you do? So when you're working, you find it better working with the pictures, or you find it working just painting more of the stuff?
It's a mix.
It's a mix.
It's a mix. Pictures can't do everything for you, and I actually enjoy painting the detail by hand when I get the time to do it. Yeah, it's a mixture, and it completely depends on the project. So let me get to some of the things I did for this little chat of ours. Here's a couple quick creatures I did. And this is kind of the straightforward technique of kit bashing a bunch of insert meshes together into a shape you like, spitting it out to Keyshot, and then out to Photoshop and painting over it and kind of coming up with an illustration that way. Now, obviously, you can just draw this stuff straight, but if maybe you're a guy who thinks more in 3D, this might be a way to go. That's the thing. It's one of many ways to use ZBrush. So these are very simple creatures. I'll do more complex stuff later. They're a bit goofy, of course. Okay.
Where? I can't see the arm.
Good time.
There, whoa, way back there. Way back in the corner. You guys like my singing? Fantastic. Coming. It's a long walk. I'm on my way.
Before you get into creatures,
Yeah.
if you combine like all the ZBrush work and modeling together with all the Photoshop work, how long time do you think this image took you?
This image, this city one? After work, a week and a half, maybe.
So you did it in your spare time after your job?
After the kids are asleep.
The kids are asleep.
maybe
So
3
2
or 4
hours a night?
3 or 4 hours a night.
2 hours, 3 hours a night for a week.
Something.
What's your excuse, people?
Let me just get ZBrush up real quick, just so I can show that. Hopefully that brush is still in there.
If I do miss your hand, sorry. A lot of artists are hitting me up for questions and things. So if I miss anybody, just keep your hand up. Are you going to make any more tutorials for Gumroad, Peter?
I will.
All right. There you go, Pablo. I answered it for you.
Ask him what he
Online.
wants, though. Because I'll take requests. I don't know. Let's see. Let me see if that brush is still in there. Of course not. Where is it? Oh, I imported a brush for the demo. It should be automatically loaded, though.
I'll just load it back up.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Here's how you load a brush. It's a big one.
It's a big brush, I guess. It's taking a bit of time here. Okay. So some of these demos I'm going to show you, I almost exclusively use this insert mesh brush. Did you see that?
Oh, we see it all right.
Okay.
Pick
So-
one.
Yeah. So this is a mixture of very specific shapes as well as a bunch of very lumpy, random, weird shapes. And this is, again, just another technique to brainstorm and come up with ideas maybe you didn't expect to come up with. There's a few things that are kind of, useful, like ears and kind of skull-like shapes, but there's also weird stuff in there that could be used any number of ways. So let me just get back to this, and when you watch these videos, you'll know that a lot of this stuff comes from that insert mesh brush. So here's a quick creature, and just sort of kit bashing something together without a real plan. And this one's kind of the more straightforward of the creature demos. I'm using the parts very literally. It's like here's a leg shape, I'll use it as a leg. Here's a wing shape, I'll use it as a wing. It's not too long. And using parts that don't seem to make sense together and kind of seeing what happens once you start mushing it all together with a very light idea in the back of your mind. You know, by now it's obvious that it's kind of an insectoid creature of some kind, and I'm just sort of trying to figure out where it's going to go. And I don't need to take it too far because I know that I'm going to severely paint over it, almost replacing it completely in the end. One of the things I like about doing this kind of technique too, though, for design is being able to choose a camera angle on something. Obviously, if you're very talented, you can do that in Photoshop in a 2D way. I like the freedom sometimes of being able to turn it, try different lenses, things like that.
You got a question right here.
Go for it.
Coming at you.
Where can we download that in ZBrush?
It's going to be on, if you took my workshop, I'm going to give you that for free, but I'll just stick it up on Gumroad for a buck or two, because I need a new computer, and you guys can help me get there. Right, so I kind of got to this point and did a key shot render, very plain lighting, and then just sort of started working on top of that. This is just another render. Actually, this is not key shot. This is straight out of ZBrush, so that's just a toon shader for the heck of it. And this is the draw over that I did from that. Kind of a comic style. It's not meant to be realistic. But there's things in there that I maybe wouldn't have come up with had I just done a straight drawing. So there's one. 15 more minutes? That's fine. I'll get there. Oh, I would love a little more time. Another 15. Yeah, let's see where I am after these. I think it'll fit. Here's another quick creature. This one's a little weirder and left field. This one's uses a little bit more sculpting and Z-spheres, as well as insert meshes. But again, it's kind of being a former animator and clay sculptor. I kind of appreciate the chance to kind of manipulate these objects and pose them in 3D before I actually get to drawing on top. And this guy's kind of just a bizarre little alien dude. Pop ahead a little bit. Very rough sculpting with the clay buildup and throwing a skull in there. Not really sure what I'm doing. I'm just trying it out. I think it doesn't. I don't keep that in the end, but it was fun to look at. Switching materials. I switch materials a lot because it changes your view of what you're working on and kind of wakes your brain up a little bit to switch materials sometimes. So I took this guy a little further, probably further than I needed to, but I get carried away sometimes. And a lot of these things are landmarks more than details. Like stuff should, kind of figure out where things should go. Yeah, toes. Now I'm messing with the face. I have no idea what's going on here. Sticking things on his head. My favorite kind of creatures are the more offbeat, weird things. So when I'm doing this for myself, things can get kind of strange. But that's good enough. I posed the thing and rendered it. I eventually got rid of those arms on the side, on the top of the head, because it looked like little arms going, wee! See, he's having fun, wee! But I didn't know that until later. It's like, yeah, let's get rid of that. So there's a final creature with maybe an hour or so of paint over. And again, it's kind of a comic style, which I like to do sometimes, just to get out of realism. So there's that dude. So there's another use for the ZBrush. Let's see. Now here's some more. Let's see, which one is this? Whoopsie. All right, let's save this one. No, let's do this one. Now here's an example of how rough you can be in ZBrush. Like I've been doing it long enough that I know what I'm trying to get in the end, so I could stop very early sometimes in constructing the understructure of an illustration. And this is a good example because where this thing ends up is very, very rough, and it's like, it's not clear that it's actually going to end up being anything of value. But then you bring it in and you start painting on it, and it kind of go from there with your imagination. So this is using the same brush, kind of grabbing parts and sticking them together, and using the move tool to kind of move them around and squish them and inflate and drag, use the, translate tool to kind of elongate. And this guy didn't end up having legs, but at first I thought maybe I'd do a full body, but time was an issue. And here I'm just kind of thinking in broad strokes, like, okay, it's got a hunchback, it's got a certain humanoid arrangement of parts. I don't really know where I'm going. I know I wanted to do something that didn't have like a traditional face, maybe some other kind of creature with different qualities. So that's part one of that. I lost some footage, unfortunately, so this is jumping ahead. But I'm still just throwing in insert meshes and a few curves. I'm adding some little wormy details just to see what they do. I don't know where, maybe I'll erase it later, I don't know. I kind of don't care. It's just like, it doesn't cost anything to try things using ZBrush for this kind of work, so why not give it a shot and see if it's useful. Okay, so that's kind of where that guy ended up. And sorry, it's reading off a thumb drive, so it takes a little bit longer. So here's the render I ended up with, and even I can see that that's a total mess, right? There's not a lot of direction to the design. It's kind of got certain things that work, certain things that are like, ugh, kind of like, looks like kind of deformed Marshmallow Man. But then it's just a matter of starting to work on it. And I think of this as just the canvas that I'm then going to turn into something. And where it goes, it could go really far from this or stay very close. So I just start bending things around in Photoshop, using the blending tools to kind of get these kind of parts that are not blended together, even remotely, to kind of work together, just like smearing and blending together, and you start to get a little more structure in your design. I'm like, oh, this needs to be blown up in the back, so I just sort of start cutting and pasting. Some real-world reference to kind of get the ball rolling on the teeth. Some poor woman's dental pictures used for terrible purposes. This is a jump ahead in terms of working on it. I should have saved a thing for it, but I did not. But now I know what I want this guy to be like, head structure-wise and body features and things like that. But I got the ideas from being way back here with this stuff. It's like I want these kind of weird forward-facing protrusions and sensory organs or whatever the heck they are. So I knew I wanted to get there somehow. And now it's feeling more cohesive, and then it's just a matter of finishing the image, getting in there by hand and adding surface detail the old-fashioned way with the, painting by hand. Adding lighting effects by hand just to kind of give it some dimensionality, wrapping some rim lights and things like that. Background, blah, blah, blah. And we got a final image. Oops. I love working this way because there's just a lot of freedom, but it's just a lot of stuff suggested by these shapes and accidents that you were willing, you're willing to put up with these kind of question marks in your sculpture. and then turn them into something. And it's just a fun technique to kind of try and see what happens. Like I was talking about the movie Arrival, you know, the awesome movie that's coming out soon. The alien designs. When I first started working with the director, we just started in pencil and paper and did lots and lots of designs that way. And nothing was really striking him. And suddenly I said, okay, the heck with it. I'm going to start kit bashing stuff in ZBrush and see what happens. And the moment I switched to ZBrush to give him design ideas that way, oh, suddenly everything was like, we're hitting it. You know, we found the design that way super quick. So the point of that is to say that is when you're working with clients, and that's one of the great things about working at Tippett. Like including Tippett and all the other projects, I've probably worked on 50-something movies by now. And each one is like a different puzzle to figure out as far as who you're working with, the style that people like to work in, you know, the director's taste or the art director's taste or the production designer's taste, all these different people. You're adjusting your workflow to kind of get along and please these guys that you're working for. And so part of the job as a freelance designer on films and games and other whatever comes down the pike is to kind of have enough variety in your skill set to change things up and hopefully get something that works for people. And I was glad I knew 3D because it really made a big difference once, you know, he was rejecting all my pencil sketches and it was getting frustrating and I thought, oh man, I'm gonna get the boot here.
You got a question on the floor here, Peter.
Okay.
Hey, Peter. Okay. Hey, Peter. I was just wondering if, are there any projects that you were particularly attached to or that you were really pleased with the result, like how it ended up on screen or anything like that?
Yeah, the old stuff from the old days. You know, like obviously being part of Jurassic Park was a big deal. You know, Starship Troopers was a big project for Tippett. And we had so much pre-production time. It was such a rare chance to make all these things ahead of time and figure out the look of that movie. And it was a new big project for the studio. So there's just kind of like this camaraderie of this impossible job landing in the studio and like trying to figure it out with everybody. And I like the movie too. So, but I mean, I've done small things too that I was happy I had a little piece of. Like, you know, I sculpted a little puppy back in the early '90s, a little dead puppy that ended up being used in Mice and Men, you know, with Malkovich. And you see it, you may see it for like a quarter of a second as he's turning and carrying this thing. And he's like, oh, I pet it too hard. But even just like having a little bit of that, it's just kind of cool. So, I mean, there's been lots of great jobs. I mean, Left 4 Dead 2 was a great game to work on over at Valve because I got to do a lot, build things and concept, and it was a great deal. And the game came out and it was very good, so. There's also a lot of stinkers. I would say, like, you know, 1 out of every 20 projects I'm really proud of, you know, if that. Like, in my whole, like, IMDb page, there's probably half a dozen jobs where I'm, like, you know, like, personally proud of, so. And it's just, you know, special effects movies, at least in the 90s and stuff, chances were, if you're working on a special effects movie, it was going to be kind of crappy. Because most of them are, you know. It's like, we remember the jewels, the fantastic Blade Runners and things, but there's plenty of My Favorite Martian and Beverly Hills Chihuahua. And that's when I made the switch to games. Well, those weren't real dogs, you know. I mean, it's challenging stuff. It's like, it's really hard to do. But like, I started this kind of career because I wanted to work on Blade Runner, and I wanted to work on American Werewolf in London, I wanted to work on Star Wars, that kind of stuff. And it's like, Beverly Hills Chihuahua. Anyway, so here, let me do here's a more involved demo of a creature. It's a little more realistic. This is also using kit bash techniques. There might be some sound underneath this, but it's not important. Some ambient music. So again, I'm starting without a real clue as to where I'm going and just seeing what happens. And see, it's rarely that you use the insert mesh brushes. Usually it's very rare that I leave them alone as is. I always end up pulling and pushing and changing them into something else. And part of the reason why I'm actually giving away this brush that I've been using for so long is I think it's kind of healthy to throw away your tools once in a while and start with fresh stuff. So I have to set some time aside to make 500 new insert mesh bits for another, because there's a style to these insert meshes, you get a style to the things you make with it. And I need to change things up to kind of not repeat myself too much. Now this guy and the next one I show you, they're both about two evenings worth of work from nothing to complete image. And that's kind of, partially it's because I get impatient, I want to finish things, but it's also partly practice. Just like I said before, you have to kind of work quickly in the freelance situation or a lot of situations, you have to crank stuff out. And if I want to do 3D work that competes with 2D concept art people, I need to be able to turn something around as fast as they do. So it's I'm always kind of practicing on ways to kind of speed things up. And like this kind of design is, I have a lot of the same influences as anybody else, the Giger and the Beksinski paintings and all that stuff, and Wayne Barlow, his old expedition book is made such a huge impression on me. So when I get the chance, I'm always making these weird kind of bony-headed, with weird protrusions coming off of their skulls and things. I just like those design elements. And I'm doing a bit of smoothing and blending here. I don't go too crazy with it, but I wanted to kind of take it a little bit further before I started the paint over process. And sometimes you need to take it a little further because you're lighting this thing in Keyshot or whatever you're lighting it in, and you want those light elements to sort of bounce off the features of the face or the head. So sometimes you can paint that stuff in very easily. Sometimes, why not sculpt it? Because it'll give you stuff to work with later. I got a little bit carried away here with flattening and smoothing, and it wasn't really 100% necessary. But I didn't have a producer with a clipboard showing up, saying to hurry up, so.
You got a question right here on the floor?
Yeah.
What subdivision level are you working in?
I dynamesh as high as my computer will handle. My kind of rule of thumb is if it takes more than 10 seconds or so to re-dynamesh, then I turn down the subdivisions. I don't want to wait for it, so I often work like the other guys were talking in terms of working very low res for long periods of time.
You got another one here right on the floor.
But the head and the chest are separate objects. That's a way to kind of keep it lighter.
Here's another question for you.
Hey, when you create kit bash libraries, do you set aside like a week creating different shapes, or are you taking apart different
Well,
projects?
Yeah, some of them are pieces of old models. Some of them are just, I had nothing better to do, so I made like 6 different shapes. And it's also combining other insert mesh brushes from different projects and just sort of piling them up into one. I have like 3 of those things that I use. I also have like maybe 3 or 4 kind of techie, hard surface related ones. And yeah, they get a lot of use. So here's kind of moving on from the ZBrush to lighting and painting over and seeing what we come up with. So I didn't show the keyshot pass, but these are the renders. You'll see here that these are just different layers. And one thing I like to do with keyshot is render out different materials and stack them in layers in Photoshop and kind of, in this guy's case, he didn't require that many different layers to kind of mix and match with. There's a robot next that does a lot more of that. But since I'm in Keyshot and I'm rendering, why not render a bunch of different materials and see what I like to use? So that's what's going on here on the side. And this goes by pretty quick because you guys don't want to sit here for half an hour.
That's regular speed?
This is the half, no.
All right. You got another question here on the floor, Peter.
Okay.
When you begin a new project, how do you know whether to start by kit bashing or using more traditional design workflows like painting and drawing?
It depends if I'm doing it for myself or for a client. That kind of dictates what you're going to do. For myself, I'll do both because one way I'll do kit bashing for a few projects and kind of get sick of doing that, and I'll go back to traditional, building up sculptures the way most people do. It's just kind of it's either based on who you're working for or what mood you're in, really. So here I'm cleaning up the render, getting rid of errors and blending things together. I think of this as sculpting too. When I'm in Photoshop, I'm still thinking in 3-dimensional mode. I'll put a slower version of this on Gumroad so you could follow it, but all I'm doing is using the blender brush and smearing the existing image around, drawing in other elements by hand. I got a rough idea of where I'm going and roughly what material I'm painting in terms of hard versus soft or bumpy and scaly or whatever. You're always kind of juggling these ideas in your head as you work. I do a lot of stuff in this one by hand, but I also then start bringing in photographs and using the happy accidents from different textures and things like that I lay over the image to kind of come up with a final look.
Got another question right over here for you.
Sure.
What was the transition like from film to games?
It was an adjustment. It's a different culture, really. That's the thing I noticed the most. But I had a weird situation working at Tippett. I worked at Tippett for like 16 years. And I started there when there was 10 people, and it was kind of like, it was always a mom and pop operation, but even as a visual effects studio, it's different from other visual effects studios. So I was coming from the mom and pop sort of feel into office buildings, with elevators and things like that, and people with totally different backgrounds. And that takes getting used to, especially if you come from my background, which is so different. There were no schools for this stuff, so you weren't working with people who just came out of school to learn the job. It's like all the people I worked with in the early days figured it out by themselves in their bedrooms with, their garages. And there was no choice, right? I'm sure I would have loved, the access to information now kind of makes me crazy. I had no information back as a kid in San Jose, except for a few magazines, and so noticing the culture and kind of getting used to it. And then the working methods are similar, but they're not similar. They rhyme with visual effects work, but they're not exact. But you have more time, you get more leeway.
Here's a question from online, from Juan.
Sure.
Do you keep anatomy in mind while kit bashing, or do you just set that aside for the paint over?
Do I keep it like reference up?
No, I think she's asking, when you're kit bashing, are you really thinking about anatomy
yeah,
at all? Or are you
totally.
just saving that for when you're going to do the paint over?
Yeah, both. I mean, I'm using a lot of like stuff that is based roughly in the animal and human world. I love doing stuff that doesn't look anything like that too. But yeah, this is just a humanoid creature, so I'm still thinking in terms of functionality and all that good stuff. It's kind of necessary. And I'm sorry this is going by so quick, but it's just a lot of stuff a lot of steps to kind of go through. Coloration of the black and white image, starting to lay in photo textures to kind of start making it look interesting in there. Do like a whole, like I'm using all kinds of stuff that doesn't exactly go with creaturey, doesn't exactly say creaturey. Like if we go back a little bit, that's some fiber, here's some coral, here's some rhino wrinkles. There's a dissected rhino body that I just laid over to kind of give that meaty feel. And it's just a lot of mixing and matching. It's actually the heart of a baby rhino cut in half. I found this zoologist that does these interesting dissections, and it's like, oh, I'm going to use that for something someday, so I kept it. Using kind of obvious reference that works really nicely. There's an elephant eye that's going to turn into a monster eye. Hopefully, I don't want people to say, "Oh, look at that elephant eye." There's a hairless cat's side. Here's some moss. Here's some rocks. Like I think somebody else was talking about this too, like using things that you don't expect to work with organic design and things like that. Don't just use skin textures you found. You can use anything. You could use a pile of junk. It just could be, if you can make it work, you might find some interesting uses for stuff that you wouldn't think would work. Again, I love doing stuff by hand the slow way, but I'm trying to crank this out. This is the second day working on it in the evening, and I just want to finish it. Working on the background, some presentation. There's some moss from a rock on the beach. I mean, he already looks like a guy, an existing character of some kind, physical. Now I'm doing a little color balancing. Now I'm doing some fake depth of fields, since I don't have the real depth of field.
Here's another question.
Hey, good stuff. Do you ever try to take what you resolve in Photoshop and actually bring it back into ZBrush with all these textures and all of the paint over sculpting that you're doing?
Occasionally. Well, you gotta listen to some opera while I'm doing this. Little Pavarotti, or who is that? One of the tenors, anyway. It's epic creature time, so you gotta listen to some opera. I definitely go back and forth with Photoshop. I've done was doing some interesting tests with drawing in Photoshop and then projecting that onto a flat plane that's been subdivided and then sculpting onto the flat plane to create three-dimensional elements onto a flat drawing, which is, you'd have to see it to understand what I'm talking about. It sort of works, but it's kind of funky. But yeah, you kind of have to have the freedom to kind of hop back and forth between programs. Mostly it's 3D to Photoshop, not the other way around, but you definitely create textures and alphas and things like that, obviously. And now I'm creating some rim lights that were not there initially. It really helps to kind of bring the character forward and not make it look so flat. Trimming up the edges. And I kind of don't care that it looks a bit phony up close. I'm trying to draw for the pulled out view. And now I'm just kind of going and touching up. I mean, this phase of kind of cleanup and tweaking can go on forever, so you kind of have to make yourself stop. It looks way better on the big screen because it's all contrasty. And kind of, yeah. You're painting some material qualities on there by hand, kind of shiny wetness versus, dry areas. And here I'm creating fake depth of field. Basically what I'm doing, I moved on to another, you can see that this is a new image. The one behind it is blurry, and the one on top, I'm erasing towards the blurry. So I'm mixing a blurry image with a sharp image to create fake depth of field. It just gives a little touch of realism to it. Now I'm just kind of erasing sections to kind of make them look roughly how it would if it was photographed by camera. And at the last minute, I thought he should have little hairs and stuff. And quick and dirty Photoshop brushes. It's a little color variation, some eyebrows. This might have been 3 evenings worth of work. I can't remember. This was back in June, so I can't quite remember. But I was making an effort to be quick. So there's the final guy. We'll leave that up for a little shameless promotion. Gumroad, okay. So my last guy is a hard surface version of basically the same principles, but using hard surface insert brushes and kit bashing that way and creating a bust of a robot. And it's basically the same approach, just sort of slightly different mindset.
We're going to need to wrap up soon, though, unfortunately.
Okay,
so.
we'll blast through these.
Sorry.
This is the last thing, so.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to make room for Thomas, too. You got a question here while you're looking for files.
So for that last one, how did you know when you were done?
I just get bored. Well, there's like a list in my head of things I have to hit before I could even call something done. And once I hit that little internal list, then I just say, enough, You start to massage it too much, and once you realize that you're not adding anything to the picture, you're just kind of, in visual effects, it's like they used to call it this thing called pixel f***ing in dailies, where you were just like, oh, you're tweaking this little thing that nobody except the director notices, and once you're the director who's pixel f***ing your design, you need to stop. All right, same idea here. Now this one started off, I was just doing some real crappy, quick, rough head sketches just for practice. I'm not by nature a hard surface guy, so I'm always trying to bone up on that stuff. And it's gonna go by quick, so I just wanna explain real quick that I just did a few individual heads, and I didn't really like any of them, so I smashed them all together to make one, and that's what the robot came from. So this is just quick sketches before work, kind of just trying to become Furio, if I could learn to be Furio someday. And then some of it's hand sculpted, some of it's kit bashed, that kind of thing. But none of them were going anywhere I wanted, and so I just sort of combined them into one head and messed with that for a bit. So here's all those guys kind of smashed together as a starting point. And then it'll stop being stop motion in just a second. And then I just kind of get in there and start dynameshing and sculpting and kind of looking for forms that are interesting, using the polish brush and the clay buildup and all the normal tools. There's nothing fancy here. And I'm just trying to figure out what to keep, what to get rid of. pop ahead because I don't want to use up too much. I have a few of these to show. Let's go back a little bit. You know, just kind of winging it, basically. I kind of wanted to do sort of a worker robot, someone not necessarily like a hero, badass of some kind, but something a little more like, not generic, but not the hero of the movie kind of design. He's kind of a... And now I'm just sort of sculpting shapes to create plates and cover pieces and stuff like that. And I don't really take it much further than this before I start bringing in insert mesh brush pieces and adding on top of this, because I know that I'm going to go in Photoshop and clean up and paint and make this thing look like the real deal. And I'm just trying things and erasing them, and this goes on for a bit here. So I know, I kind of thought, okay, I'll make the neck out of insert mesh pieces, or maybe I'll make some custom, here's a custom neck joint that I made real quick. It didn't have to be perfect, but I just sort of used ZModeler and some other stuff to kind of just whack it together real quick. So I was gonna make kind of like a spine, neck spine kind of configuration. And then you just start saying, oh, okay, I need to make wires for it, I need to make this, I make that. Just a lot of back and forth. Cleaning up the head a bit. Oh, crap. I skipped ahead a bit. All right. Well, here's a whole bunch of insert mesh pieces. You know, this is stuff from everyone who's ever put out a Gumroad, you know. It's, a lot of it I change, some of it I keep the way it is. And I know that this isn't going to impress anybody at this point, but it's kind of like I'm trying to, again, create a canvas to work on, is the idea. You could see some of Vitaly's, you know, shock absorbers in there and stuff like that. And I made a whole bunch of very simple shapes. Now I'm just kind of busting this guy apart and fixing things up. So these are all the different brush pieces separately. Yeah, there's one of my brushes right there, so. A couple of those guys in there. So you can see just a whole bunch of different things to choose from and play with. A lot of these I just made myself real quick in ZModeler and from other projects and things like that. And you slowly kind of build up a library of things to work with. Let's see, what can I skip and not mess things up? Oh, and posing it a little bit. I don't want to do like a dead dog pose where everything's even. So I'm just kind of getting in there and turning his head a little bit just to give a little bit of personality or a little bit of interest. Ta-da. Because I'm trying to do a portrait, so it's like school portrait time. So these are all, you know, none of it's finished looking, none of it's like 100%, but it's something to work with. So here in the key shot, I bring it in there and I throw all kinds of different materials on it. I know I'm going to want rusty areas and shiny areas and rubber areas. So like a quick and dirty way to do it is just to render all these layers of different materials out and then stack them in Photoshop and use masks to reveal them or hide them and things like that. It's crazy how when you bring stuff into key shot, it suddenly looks awesome for a second, you know, like. Something about a nice render that makes even crappy stuff look pretty until you look closely. Okay, so that's that. Let's move on to the next one. Oops, I don't want that player. It's no good. So now I'm going to bring stuff in, I believe I'm bringing stuff into Photoshop and starting to mix and match these layers here. And try to figure out who this guy is and what its purpose is and the wear and tear and what it's been through and finding that yellow material I liked because it kind of indicated sort of an industrial use of some kind. So I try to keep some of that. And now I'm just sort of color balancing and giving a little weight to the image before I start painting. Get a little gradient and dark on the bottom. And there's a lot of design aspects to this. So to consider, it's not, whenever you're working on things like this, you're kind of juggling all the things you've learned from other jobs and what people have told you. It's like, oh, you got to have balance. You got to try a gradient to give a little weight to the bottom of the picture. There's like a million things flowing through your head when you're a concept guy doing these sorts of things. So here you can see I just created a mask, and I'm basically erased this underneath color, and I'm painting it back by painting on the mask. And a lot of the surface detail on this guy is created that way. It's just a matter of revealing layers and hiding layers, and then custom layers of just painting and other textures and stuff thrown on top. And repairs and fixing certain elements that didn't work in the sculpt. And this is really the fun part, is combining all this stuff and kind of seeing it kind of come to life a bit. And I'm just erasing by hand. I'm not being very careful. Like the final image that this is, if you look at it up close, you're like, ugh, I don't buy it. But you just step back a little bit and it reads fairly realistically. It's all cheating, I used to feel bad about doing 2D work using ZBrush, but then it's like, wait, I'm doing 2D work on a computer anyway. You're cheating from the very beginning. So it's hard not to use these great tools as they get better and better all the time. I'm starting to paint wear and tear here and there. There'll be a lot more of that, but just by revealing different materials, you kind of create this complexity that was very easy to create. Now I'm just sort of rubbing off paint by revealing the shiny thing underneath. And I'm doing it by hand. I'm not using fancy alphas or anything. I'm just sort of scratching at it in a way that makes sense to me. And it works really well. Trying to disrupt the surface, make it look old and worn. This thing was, you can see it's totally roughly sculpted and not finished whatsoever. Make it look like you meant to do that, Just throwing an overall rusty thing over the top just so if I need it, it's under there. Grunge it up a bit because I want him to be kind of old and like he's not used anymore. And I may use it a tiny bit in the end, here and there, but it's pretty easy just to make that quickly. And this guy, the bulk of the work was just this process of erasing and adding and erasing and adding, and it's still faster than building it completely, and UVing and creating all the textures and, Look at it, yeah. Same thing as they were talking about, with the Square Enix stuff, it's like wear and tear in logical areas, It's starting to look like the surface of an old like Caterpillar tractor or something. hop ahead since we're running low on time. Here I'm adding, let me just show this cheat real quick. You know, finding pictures of cables on the internet, cutting and pasting. Is my rust showing through? Just grab these pictures. I just needed stuff dangling from underneath the guy, and I didn't want to build it, so I just sort of cheated. Cheat. Like he was unplugged and put away for repair or something like that. I needed a post underneath it. I started making fake supports under my busts and heads and stuff because I was tired of looking at these floating things, so I tried to make it look like they were attached to something in the real world. Cleaning up edges. Just pop through here a little bit. You know, fixing, you know, cutting and pasting from one part of the guide to another. Here I'm using a lazy Nezumi plugin to do straight lines and things like that. ZBrush in Photoshop. If you don't have lazy Nezumi, you're missing out if you're a Photoshop person. I'm doing a little sharpening pass. Things get a little soft. I'm cutting and pasting some pieces around. Try to fix some of the design elements that I didn't like. Just adding a few little features in here. That's an ellipse tool that in that plugin. You can paint perfect ellipses and perspective and all that stuff. So just last minute touches here and there and kind of tidying up. Little slightly glowing remnants of life in this guy. Now I'm doing the fake depth of field trick again, erasing the sharp, revealing the blurry stuff. Vignetting. So that's most of the guy there. And 2 days before I had nothing, so that's using the kind of the power of ZBrush to create something very quickly that looks pretty complex. And if you sent this to a director a couple days after he asked for it, he'd flip, right? So it's a fun technique.